What's going on, everyone? I am Jeff St. Pierre, and this is episode 161 of the Adult Education Podcast. Today, we have author Joelle Kidd joining the show. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the show. I really do appreciate you all sticking around with me. It feels good to be back. I had to take the month of August off as I just had too much going on with my family at the end of summer, and I really wanted to enjoy some time with them before my wife and daughter had to go back into school. But I'm back now, and I've got a lot of good things lined up for us. So let's get started with Christian pop culture. Sure, right? Nothing like getting back into the swing of things with a potentially controversial topic. I will admit right out of the gate here that I am not a religious person. I grew up around the Catholic Church, but ran from it as soon as I had the chance. But I've always been fascinated by religion, all religions for that matter, and the power that they have over people and communities. I try not to judge folks for the choices that they make with religion. I really just want to understand all of it. I find it just fascinating. Something that has always been really interesting to me has been the impact of Christian pop culture. So what am I talking about when I say that? Well, evangelical Christians in particular don't tend to like actual pop culture, so there are groups and artists that make Christian versions. They sound and look a lot like regular pop culture, but the messaging here is very different. You know, you may have heard about some Christian bands at DC Talk, the Newsboys. You may have heard about Christian movies like Fireproof or God's Not Dead, for example. Christian pop culture has been around for a long time, but it really started to have a moment back in the early 2000s, which happens to be when today's guest was the perfect age to soak it all in. This week, I'm speaking with Joelle Kidd. She's written a book called Jesusland, Stories from the Upside Down World of Christian Pop Culture. I really found this to be an absolutely fascinating read. I really loved it from start to finish. Learning more about the machines at work behind the product that was eaten up by millions of young people and how it's continued to grow today. Really interesting stuff. So please enjoy my conversation with Joelle Kidd.
Am I back?
Hey, there you are.
I don't know what's happening here.
It's okay. I got to be honest. I have held out as long as possible on recording like conversations this way. And I am trying this really for the first time. So I was like, I hope I didn't screw something up here on my end.
Yeah.
I have no idea what's going on.
I'm sure it's my terrible computer, but
usually I'm just all about the audio, but lately I've been getting some flack from people. They're like, you don't want to do video? I'm like, I guess I have to finally do it. I've been trying to hold out as long as possible. Well, Joelle, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, great to meet you. Finally hear you now.
I'm glad that we were able to make this work because I do find your book really fascinating, actually. And just to throw it out there, Joelle Kidd is your full name. Jesusland, Stories from the Upside Down World of Christian Pop Culture. I'm curious so far, because I'm sure you've heard from people already. What has the response been like from folks reading this book?
It's been really positive, which is really awesome for me, because it's such a kind of personal topic and also a niche topic to talk about Christian pop culture and the time period of the 2000s when I was growing up in it. I guess part of me thought maybe no one will care about this, but I've heard from a lot of people, and it's kind of amazing to hear like strangers that I don't know that have read the book writing me to tell me that it really resonates with their experience and that they grew up feeling the similar way. So yeah, it's been really nice. Where
do you stand? You don't have to answer this question if you don't want, but where do you stand right now? It seemed like in the book you were sort of grappling with your Christianity and where you fell into this whole world. Where do you stand now? Is that something that you're comfortable discussing at all?
Yeah, I think I was really grappling. Having to write a whole book about it also like made me think about it a lot more. I don't know if I've really come down definitively somewhere, but I do feel like I still have some kind of spiritual side to me, and I have a much more broad view of what that might mean than I grew up with. But I've really cooled on the word Christian because of, I don't know, I guess like the way that a lot of Christian groups, the things they believe and the ways they portray themselves don't really align with how I feel that the religion should look. So yeah, I've kind of abandoned that as a category for myself, but I do still feel like a lot of affection for the communities I grew up in and a lot of spiritual meaning out of that religion.
Sure. And I think it's an interesting case whenever you talk about religion, because as a whole, there are so many wonderful people that adopt any specific religion and they follow a set of beliefs that they believe is trying to make them a good person. But then you also have so much negativity that gets tied. Just today, I was on TikTok and I saw someone discussing how people are leaving the church. And, church leaders are like, why is everybody leaving? And she's like, it's you. Like, you guys are why everyone's leaving. Like, you're giving people a bad name by signing up for certain things. And I just thought that was a very interesting aspect of the conversation, where it's like, we think of the word Christian as a very positive thing, but to a lot of people that might not be a positive thing. Like, that might be a scary thing coming their way,
Yeah, I think that's part of the thing I found so interesting about pop culture is I think it is a lot of times it's like a reaction to that, like, why don't young people want to be religious? Let's make Christian rap. But
Right.
It's like, no, it's the message and the politics of it that they're reacting to. It's not the aesthetics.
I have to tell you this funny story, because I've told this story to a couple other people and they just I don't think they find the humor in it the same way that I did. And I'll be honest with you, I grew up in a Catholic church, but I am not religious. Like, it's something that I grew up with, but it's not something that's carried with me. No judgment to other folks. I like to try to have an open mind about it and really try to understand where people are coming from. But I was just finishing my senior year of high school. So this is 1999. So I'll give you the year so you can kind of put this into perspective. And a couple of my friends that I worked with at a restaurant were trying to get me to come to a music festival with them. I'm a big music person here. I love doing that. My mom did not want me to go to anything like this. Okay. She was very anti music, little local shows, whatever, really hated the idea. But she loved these two boys because they were good Christian boys. So she was very happy. She was like, oh yeah, you can go away with them for the weekend. That's fine. I was like, great. I can get out of the house. This is awesome. So we go to this mountain in New Hampshire, here in America, New Hampshire, Loon Mountain, I believe it was. And there's this band on stage. They're screaming, they're yelling, they're playing hard music. And I was like, all right, this sounds interesting. And then as we start to get through the night, I start to notice a lot of different things going on here. There's a lot of crosses. There was an ad campaign at the end of the 90s with a little Taco Bell Chihuahua that said, Yo Quiero Taco Bell. They had shirts that said, Yo Quiero Jesus. And I was like, what did I just wander into? And it turned out I wandered into this 3-day Christian music festival called the Inside Out Soul Fest, which was starring like the Newsboys and all these different, all like DC Talk, like all the big heavy hitters from the late 90s, early 2000s. And I was like, I just entered into the seventh circle of hell unbeknownstly for an entire weekend.
For 3 days.
It's funny, the first band, I don't know how familiar you are with them, but there was a band called POD, which were kind of like a heavy rock band, but they were tied to the Christian community, especially at first. So they were the first band I saw. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Like, here's 4 or 5 people of color. Like, they're really just rocking out on stage, enjoying it. Like, I didn't hear lyrics at all. And, and then you see years later what they grew up to be. But it was just funny, like walking into that, and then all of a sudden it's Newsboys and Jars of Clay. And and that was my introduction to Christian pop culture. Anyway, long story to get to that point.
That's how they get you.
But that's what you talk about that in the book. You have a chapter about music, and it is interesting how it's like we're sort of copying what is pop culture, but we're giving it our own spin. And that's how you can kind of almost keep people in like a silo of like, okay, you don't have to go to Britney Spears. We've got our version of her right here that you guys can enjoy.
It's a weird relationship because you would think that something like pop music, you would think that Christianity would have a problem with the substance of it, not the not just that it's not Christian, right? I mean, but the knockoffs, the Christian versions are so similar. It's just a little bit of a tweak, a little replacement of God with any romantic person and any, like, yeah, just a little bit more modest clothing, and then you're good to go. So, yeah, it's a weird world.
Yeah, sure. For folks who have not read your book yet, Joelle, I'd love to hear like kind of how you came into this world, because you did not grow up necessarily in a Christian community, but you sort of found yourself thrown into it at one point when you were younger.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So my family lived overseas for a few years when I was really young, and we moved back to Canada, where my family's from, when I was 7. And so we were living in Slovakia in the late 90s, which is like very recently at that point, former Soviet Union. So a very secular culture, because it it had to be for many years. And my parents were Christian, but I wouldn't call them like evangelical. They were from like mainline denominations, and it was something that my family talked about, but it just sort of paled in comparison to the world of Christianity that I found when we came back to Canada and I started going to a Christian private school. And that's the first time that I encountered all of these pop culture pieces. So, I mean, I had gone to church, but I never knew that there was Christian music or Christian movies or Christian celebrities. So, yeah, it was kind of like a culture shock, a double culture shock coming back from a different place and then also coming into this Christian world. And it was kind of thinking about that weird transition that made me start writing this book. But when I started kind of digging into the pop culture I remembered, I found a lot more political agendas and
Sure.
Strange underbellies of all these things that I just remembered as kind of goofy and like a little bit nerdy versions of normal pop culture.
Well, I think the book came out at a really interesting time, at least for me. And I know you live in Canada, but I'm sure you've heard and seen a lot of things that are going on in America over the last few years. And we've had this thing called Project 2025 that we keep hearing about. But as we dive more into that, we find out that Project 2025 was really started back in like the 70s and early 80s, but it's just taken on sort of new forms. So thinking about what we know about current, what's going on in the world politically, but then also thinking about your book and like the pop culture of Christianity, it's like this was really kind of planned a long time ago, and it just really seemed to come to fruition in that early 2000s place where you were kind of experiencing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just shocked in the research at how long a tail these things had. Like you're saying, it's like in the 70s. I mean, some elements of the book I'm like talking about like gender or like there's the term muscular Christianity, this very like masculine idea of what it means to be a Christian that I think you can see playing out now in like right-wing politics and like sort of online figures that are very traditionalist and very into the gender binary. But that, I mean, has roots way back in the 1800s. So yeah, things are always kind of shifting and the same ideas carrying through in different ways. But I definitely felt like there was a lot of resonance between where we were at in 2000s and where we're at now. I think like both time periods had a bit of a rightward shift, like just in the general population, and there's a little bit more crossover between the Christian world and the secular world. So like when I started writing about this, I thought that crossover was going to be like Disney Channel stars rocking purity rings, but it also was, like the people who made these little sort of silly seeming pop culture shows for kids were also advising the president and lobbying the government. And I think that's true now too. Christian influencers have the ear of the president, have been involved in things like Project 2025. So yeah, it's always sort of I think pop culture is always a bit of a bellwether for where things are going.
Oh, I agree. I feel like people poo-poo the term pop culture like it's insignificant, but I think if you look back at history, so much is tied into what pop culture is, or you can see things coming through pop culture. Like, I think pop culture plays a much bigger part in our history than I think anybody's willing to give it credit for.
Yeah, totally.
I wonder too, like reading your book and thinking about this, because you're talking about your experiences in the early 2000s, and that's really where it started to take shape. Like you reference in the book, how there had been other times in history where Christianity had tried to start to make some more inroads in the pop culture world, but it always kind of got, sort of stopped by people reading into it or learning more. But here in the 2000s, you have the internet, and now you have this thing that you can't stop. You can't stop it. You can't slow it down. You can put whatever you want on it. And I wonder if that's the biggest reason why at that point, that was their moment to really break through and start their whole, empire.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's like kind of a combination. To me, the 2000s was the very end of like before the internet became the thing that dominated all of our lives.
Sure.
Like we were all just getting onto the internet, right? And so it was, I think, the last time when some of the big Christian industries were really popular and profitable. Like Christian bookstores were everywhere, and now there's like very few. It went from this dominant way of disseminating all this information to being sort of there's like one last holdout in every town or something. And same with like the record industry was huge, was really profitable. And Spotify and all these streaming services have kind of undercut that. Yeah, publishing, same deal. So I think that it was a time when sort of like big capitalist forces were encouraging more Christian pop culture. And then when that started to slip and those things started to be a little less profitable, I think the internet was this opportunity for everyone to put that stuff out online and reach this bigger audience, and also with less barriers, like less censorship, less sort of propriety. Like, I don't know, you can have a really wild fringe belief and you can reach a whole community of people who might be amenable to that, but maybe that wouldn't be published by a mainstream Christian publishing house. So it's been a really interesting shift, I think. And I think nowadays it's the influencers and the people who are kind of directly putting their message online that have the most influence.
Yeah, I mean, I think as the shift of technology and as things have been created, I mean, I think you're 100% on, like the current wave of TikTok, Instagram influencers, they are having their moment right now because, again, there's nothing that can stop you from putting out whatever you want to put out, whatever it is. So you've got this whole crew of people that are just throwing it out there and seeing what sticks, and people are sticking and they're coming back to it.
That's another thing I felt I had a lot of problem with when I started looking at these pieces is I think there's this kind of circular thought that, like, if something is successful, because it's a Christian thing, if it's successful, it must be sort of God ordained. Like, it's somehow proof. If your Christian movie makes a lot of money, then it was really God wanted it to happen or something. And so, yeah, I feel the same way about online stuff where, oh, we've reached this huge audience, my message must be great, but it's like, well, maybe your message is shocking and the algorithm is favoring that, or it's not a sign of quality.
I had this conversation with friends before, and it's like you just said, if something good happens to you, it's because God wanted it to happen to you. But if something bad happens to you, then it's not God's responsibility. It's just like, something. And I've always found that really interesting. Like, I had a friend who I love dearly that was having a really hard time getting pregnant, and they said to me one day, if God wants us to get pregnant, he will, let us get pregnant. And I've known this person for a very long time. So this was an inside joke between the two of us. But I said, well, maybe God's telling you shouldn't be a parent. Like, maybe that's your thing, and of course, like, we couldn't go down that road, right? Like, she was like, no, right. God would. And I was like, it's just really interesting that we only accept the good, not the bad. We don't accept that both two things could be true here,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's so fascinating too. Like, we talked a little bit about music before, but also movies became a very big thing, and you did have some mainstream. It's funny. I've seen A Walk to Remember 1,000 times. I always really enjoyed that movie. It's no Oscar winner, but it's a fun movie. I never thought of it as a Christian film. Like, I know it had religious undertones. Don't get me wrong. I saw that, but I never thought of it as a Christian film. But you pointed that out, and I was like, interesting. I don't think I would have pinpointed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that really plays into that range of what is Christian media. I mean, that's a story that was written by I think Nicholas Sparks is a Christian.
Yes.
So it's based on his novel, but directed by Adam Shankman, who, I mean, I know most from going on Drag Race, and I don't think he's a Christian. And like, it's just sort of a funny, it's a mainstream, like a big budget movie. It's not like a little Christian distributor. So I think that was part of that cultural crossover at the time. Whereas something like The Passion of the Christ was this huge it's presented more as like an evangelical tool to convert people to Christianity. So yeah, there's an interesting range.
You kind of dive into that a little bit in the book too, where you talk about how there were movies like that were evangelical tools to recruit people. But then it sort of seems like Christian pop culture has just created its own world, and now people don't have to exit that world. They can just say, so who are you playing to, right? Like, there's one thing to have a movie or an album or whatever that can help inspire someone to look to Jesus and look to religion in a different way, but now you're just talking to the same people that are already there. So I always wonder, like, what's the point almost? Like, you're just really telling the same story to each other over and over again.
Yeah. It's really just sort of siloing off that group of people into their own media ecosystem. And yeah, I tend to agree. It's like, why, to me, it seems really cynical. Then the only point is to make money from this base and to shore up. I mean, I kind of think when you look at the types of movies, Christian movies that have been made, because they've moved more in that direction where they're playing to a Christian audience, you get things like the God's Not Dead movies, which are really just like like a Facebook rant in movie form or something. Like it's just it's an argument against atheism, but you can tell they're not expecting any atheists to watch this movie. It's just preaching to the choir. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of shoring up what people already believe, or making them feel like vindicated in some way, and that's maybe a popular a popular money getter.
I do wonder if we're starting to see another shift in that world, though, because you had that movie, The Sound of Freedom, that had a lot of controversial, but a lot of success a few years ago. And I've noticed in movie trailers where there's a movie, you know, it's Angel Studios or whatever, like these are generally Christian studios, there are some bigger names and more well-known people that are taking part in these films now. And I don't know if they're seeing any of the success that Sound of Freedom movie saw, but I wonder if we're seeing a shift where folks are like, well, you know what, there is money to be made in Christian programming. We should try to do one that we can attract, you know, non-Christians in as well.
Yeah, that very well could be. And I do think there's been like a lot of recent movies that have attracted more like big stars. Yeah, and I don't know if that's an effect of having more money to throw around, more like to get an actor who's less cheap to get, but yeah, it could also be like another shift. I feel like all of these things are very cyclical, you know, like there was this big evangelical push, and then when culture kind of shifted away from that, maybe there was a bit more of a regrouping and siloing off, and maybe we're coming back into that big push again into trying to convert people or trying to make mainstream culture a bit more Christian.
Well, on that note, too, you talk about in the book that the main point, I think I forget what page it is, I had it marked here, but it says Christians must somehow both rule the world and also be persecuted by it. And that is such a fascinating idea in this. It's like, you are the dominant force. You are the majority here. But the conversation is very different. The conversation does not show that. And I think even in events that have happened here in America over the last week, we've seen that heavily of like, Christians are under attack. It's like, well, you are the majority. You're not under attack. No one's attacking you. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. People can be trying to, you know, legislate trans people out of existence and still feel like they're the attacked minority, which is such a strange cognitive dissonance that I was trying to figure out in the book. And I do see that a lot. I mean, I think even this kind of like reaction, not to bring up the Charlie Kirk shooting, which I feel like everyone has been talking about constantly.
It's bound to happen in this conversation sooner or later, I feel.
Right? Yeah, it just reminded me so much of the research I was doing on this idea of martyrdom that is so prevalent in evangelical Christianity, and it comes out of a bit of a like a myth. Like there's a researcher, Candida Moss, who I quote in the book, who hasn't been able to verify. I think she's verified maybe 6 out of hundreds of martyrdom stories from the early Christianity that were not actually historically accurate. They were more just like legends, but they were taught as historical fact in Christendom. And so she kind of talks about this need for Christianity to continue to perpetrate itself and to present itself in this way. You need to have the figure of the martyr. And I think that you can really see how quickly like right-wing Christianity kind of absorbs any tragedy into that framework, and suddenly the person becomes a martyr or they become sort of canonized. And it's the same thing doesn't happen with any other shooting, right? Any other horrific act of violence. It's not, if anything, it's a kind of a shrug of the shoulders, but when it's one of their own, it becomes like the most important thing that's ever happened. So yeah, it's just this kind of like victim mentality, but then a need to impose your beliefs on everyone else. So that never kind of matched up to me.
I always think about Starbucks, and I remember a few years ago, the big complaint was that Starbucks cups didn't say Merry Christmas, but they were red cups
Right.
with Christmas trees on them. Like, what
Yeah.
else do you want them to say? Like, Starbucks isn't canceling Christmas. They just have a different idea of a design than what you may
Yeah.
want. Like, so yeah, the martyrdom, but at the same time, like, it's just so interesting the way that brain can can go in that direction.
Yeah, and I think that's why it feels so disingenuous.
Sure.
Because there's no recognition of their own power, I guess, in that scenario.
What's so interesting about Christianity, if anybody listening right now that is a devout Christian that has made it this far into the conversation, I genuinely do believe there are so many wonderful human beings that identify as Christians, and there are so many Christians that do wonderful work on this planet. And even the term Christian and Christianity is something that a lot of people believe to be good. Like, my parents wanted me to go to things like youth group and stuff like that because they wanted me to grow up religious. There is a positivity to the term, but yet we're putting ourselves into a silo again where all you're seeing is one thing and you're stuck in that world. It's just an interesting place, and can be so much analysis, which is why I think I loved your book so much, because you could dive into so many different things.
There's so many rocks to turn over. Yeah, it is. I think like a lot of religions, it plays out this way too, organized religions. But I think at the core of it, there's obviously these great principles about loving one another and peace and justice and being kind to your neighbor and all this stuff, which is taught in Sunday school. But all the trappings of it are a little dicey sometimes, and I think that is part of it. I mean, I think that's why I was so interested in Christian pop culture, because this slapping the word Christian on something, it does, at least for a lot of people I knew growing up, it just sort of made it safe, and they assumed it was good. But when you start digging into it a little further, you see some of the darkness there. So yeah, I kind of hope that the book isn't off-putting to people who are Christian too much, but I hope it kind of encourages this like a deeper thought about the kinds of media you're consuming if you are a Christian, and if you do like Christian music and movies and influencers, because I think a lot of things can be kind of hiding under the surface there, and a lot of things can slip by under the guise of, well, this is all Christian, so it's fine.
I wonder, I don't know I didn't actually finish the book yet. I'm about 3/4 of the way through. I don't know if you dove too much into Christianity around the world here. I know you spent some time of your life living in other places. I know you were very young then, so you might not have noticed it. But I've heard other conversations where the version of Christianity we have here in America, maybe I'll even say North America, because I know Canada is very similar in a lot of the things that we have here, is very different from the version of Christianity in other places. Like, there's this sort of, you've heard the term American exceptionalism, I'm sure, in your life. Like, there's sort of an American exceptionalism to Christianity here as well, where everyone wants to make it their version. So there's the Christianity bubble, but there's 4,000 versions of Christianity in America and every church.
Yeah.
Like you even said, I think I heard an interview with you where you were talking about your school. It was a Christian school, but it was listed as a non-denominational school, which was really just a way to not say evangelical Christian and scare people away. Like, they wanted people to think they could be welcome. So I just think that's very fascinating to me. Like, I wonder if you noticed that in your research at all. Like, other places, do they have a very different view of Christianity than what we may see here in North America?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's a lot of different cultural ties. I mean, obviously, there's such a range of you have countries where they're like, or I'm just thinking of a country like Italy, maybe, where most of the population is Catholic, even if not practicing, and there's such a tie between church and state. Or, I mean, America has legal separation of church and state, but Canada technically doesn't have that. But we do theoretically have laws encouraging religious pluralism. So there's also interesting differences in how evangelical Christianity tries to spread itself in different countries where it may not be the state religion, or there may be a cultural push toward religious freedom in general. So yeah, it is interesting, but I do think that with Christian pop culture, I think that's also a bit of a flattening effect, where Christianity that gets exported is often conservative American Christianity. And I feel like living in Canada, I've seen there be an effect of that, even just in the last couple decades where because we're getting more and more media from like mega churches and Christian media companies in the States, you see that influence like topics and ideas that maybe weren't really common here that become more and more mainstream.
So they're being accepted is what you're saying.
They're sort of being imported. Yeah.
I wondered, like, when you said it was coming, I didn't know if it was being accepted or being like, whoa, okay, let's tone this down. Like, just a little bit.
I mean, I think probably a little bit of both, but yeah, even in researching the book and thinking back on my school, like I write in the book about this teen girls magazine called Brio that I read a lot as a kid. And I didn't know it was coming from Focus on the Family, which is the James Dobson's big company. It's like, he's kind of like, he recently died. And I would say in the past, like, few decades, he was kind of the most influential, maybe, Christian figure in America. And I mean, certainly like explicitly political. I mean, he founded like a lobbying arm of Focus on the Family. He's been in the room where the decisions are being made. And I don't think people who were stalking, my school library in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, like knew that. I think, I mean, maybe they did, but as far as I knew, I think they just thought, oh, this is for girls and it's Christian and it must be fine. And it had a lot of weird messages about gender and and sexuality and all these different things, which, whatever they fit or didn't fit with the beliefs that maybe like the administration at my school had, they certainly didn't fit with like the stated beliefs of like Canadian society at large, where, same-sex marriage has been legal since the 90s and whatever else. Like,
how dare you?
Yeah.
That's why my introduction to Focus on the Family, and then we can wrap it up, was I was starting to work for a radio station, and my boss has suggested, I forget the website's name right now, but it was a certain website that had reviews for movies and TV shows. And she was like, you should use this website, and that's where you should get the best reviews to like go on the air and talk about it. I said, okay. So I was doing it one day, and someone called in, they're like, do you understand where that's coming from? And I was like, I have no idea. Like, my boss just told me to check it out. I didn't even know. And when we did the deep dive, I was like, oh my gosh, like, it's kind of a propaganda arm of Focus on the Family. And I was like, I had no idea. So but it's interesting how it gets weaved in, and you talk about that a lot in the book too. So anyway, we can wrap this up because I know you have to go, but I do think there's so much in here that I think people from all different backgrounds, all the backgrounds of faith, even Christians would probably find this interesting. They probably lived through a lot of the same things that you lived through. And I think it's a really fascinating book. Again, your name is Joelle Kidd. The book is Jesusland, Stories from the Upside Down World of Christian Pop Culture. Joelle, if somebody wants to follow along more with you or learn more about you in this book, where should they go?
They can check me out online. JoelleKidd.com is my website. I'm mostly on Instagram, I guess, social media wise. My name is Joelle Kidd.
Joelle, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Thank you to Joelle Kidd for her time. Her book, Jesusland, Stories from the Upside Down World of Christian Pop Culture, is available now wherever you get your books. And thank you to all of you for listening to this episode of Adult Education. Until next time, be well.